Welcome to Hernando this week. I'm Brian.
I'm Nick.
And this week we're going to continue our conversation about the planning and zoning and building and get a little deeper into that. We covered a lot the first time we talked about it. I know that session ran long. I'm still not sure if it's one or two. There's a lot of content there, and a lot of it is me trying to understand the process, the limitations, what everybody's up against. And I think we identified there are some issues, some maybe not issues, but room for improvement, and processes that people struggle with on a regular basis because they like to do something, but they can't do what they'd like to do.
Yep.
So I kind of wanted to dig in a little bit further because, like, the more I'm actively involved in this stuff and the more I'm talking to people, the more questions I end up having. So looking at the Hernando Commission meeting, I think all 9 hours plus of it that they had this time.
You watched the short one.
Yeah. So there was a lot of content there, and lot of good, lot of other.
A lot of other. I like that.
But you see some of the stuff that they're dealing with, and it was the stuff that we talked about. So, again, growth is the biggest thing, and I'm still getting comments on that post that I put just with the questions and stuff. I mean, they're still commenting on that and giving me good information and feedback for the most part. But one of the things that you guys are up against on the planning and zoning, and in turn the BOCC's up against, is the constraints of what's been done in past administrations and past elected officials. And you go through this past meeting that they had, and there were several people that came before them for rezoning or replotting of a master plan or something like that. And there were several of those that they're like, hey, this was originally approved in 1980 something, and this was originally approved in this, and
Yeah, it's all vested interest.
Yeah, it's all vested interest, and you guys are stuck with that.
Yep.
So there's not a whole lot of stuff you can do once it's already vested as that piece of property to reject them from being able to allow them to use the property for what they paid the property for.
Yep.
And I get that, and I don't think a lot of other people may get that on the general public side, that they just see all this stuff coming before, because I did get some comments that, oh, here we go, there's this many agenda items on rezoning and everything else. But a lot of it is not just rezoning. It's like, hey, this was a zone for this. We're still going to use it for that. But what we'd like to do, instead of putting, apartments on it or whatever that's at this density, we're going to take a lesser density and put townhomes on it. And we're going to put single family homes on it or something like that.
Yeah. I know exactly which one you're talking about on that one.
So I think that was a good thing, because we went to a lower density thing, and that made sense. So, and
the community didn't think it was a good thing.
Well, I think that was the best use of the circumstances that you had, right? I mean, because you can't change it back to whatever the residents want it to be.
So, I think we're talking about the project on Powell Road, right?
That was one of them, yeah. That was one I think I had the least amount of issue with when I was looking at it.
So I voted against that one.
Okay.
And that was by a national builder who's coming in and trying. So it's all about how you present it too, right?
Right.
So in the beginning of all these meetings, they get to go ahead and basically set up and set the stage for what they're asking for. So there's a presentation made by staff, and then the applicant gets to come up and present their thing too. When they said this was approved for a higher density zoning, and then we're asking for less, well, if you were to look back at the original approval, yes, they were approved for a higher density zoning in a very small section of that property. It was like a quarter of the parcel that was actually zoned for multifamily at X amount of units.
So overall, for the entire parcel, did they end up with a less denser?
They did end up with less dense than they had originally been approved for as far as units.
Okay.
The reason I denied that one, and not to get too deep into specifics about just individual projects, I'm not a fan of 5 foot setbacks. So,
Right.
and that was what they were asking for.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
And that setbacks the encroachment on the neighboring property. Right.
Side setbacks. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
basically, you got a parcel, just for everyone who's not necessarily akin to how building works. The boundaries of your parcel have basically an easement around the outside edges that you can't encroach with an actual structure.
Right.
That's usually for drainage and utilities and stuff like that. Basically, if the county ever needed to be able to get a vehicle to the back of your property to go ahead and fix utility lines or sewer lines, a lot of those developments have common sewer running behind the homes.
Right.
They need to be able to get in there and service stuff. So, what they had requested on that one was 5 foot setbacks.
Okay.
As the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission, I had basically, as they presented to us, I said, hey, just so you guys know, I'm going to have a problem with this. I'm not going to vote for anything less than a 7.5 foot setback.
Right.
Because they're asking for deviations. And that's where some of the stuff will, as you get deeper into it, you'll start realizing that they're requesting XYZ with deviations.
Oh yeah, no, it
blah,
got
blah.
very complicated on some of them. Yeah, absolutely.
So the deviation is what I have a problem with on a 50-foot lot. I would much rather see a 7.5 foot setback on a side property line so that we have 15-foot minimum between structures
Right.
than 10 foot. And then you end up with drainage problems because that 10 foot is for the houses itself, but it doesn't apply to the AC pads and utility stuff.
Gotcha. So in essence, you got a 3-foot AC pad. You're 2 feet.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have 2 foot to the property line. So you only have 4 foot
Right.
essentially between AC pads.
Right.
And that messes up all kinds of drainage stuff, and it's not a good product. It is the minimum necessary for the fire code, 10 foot between structures.
Right.
But when you start really dealing with stuff, and you got an 18 or a 2 foot overhang, 18-inch or a 2 foot overhang outside of that, because your overhangs are allowed to encroach into your building setback.
Right.
You're still only
You're down to 7.5.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
So, our board approved it, but did not allow the exception of the 7.5 foot setbacks, or exception of the 5 foot setbacks. So we approved it at 7.5 and said, "You're approved on this zoning. Figure out how to fit a house on there."
Right.
It went to the commission. The commission overturned us.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
They overturned us and they allowed it back to 5 foot.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. And again, it was 9 hours plus, so
Yep.
there was a lot to it. That one, I mean, and again, I'm just trying to get brought up to speed on how all this stuff goes together and everything else.
And
but
they were trying on that one to say that they had already made a concession, that they were going to a minimum of a 50-foot lot instead of a 40-foot because the county doesn't want 40-foot lots, which we don't. At a 40-foot lot, it's nearly impossible to provide parking.
Right. And I think the only reason, like, I think we talked about this before, that I'd understand a 40-foot lot if they're townhouses because you're putting them right next to each other and there's no space between the townhouses sometimes. And you have to do that to divide the individual parcels. But
look, I mean, so, and again, my background, and I mean your background as well, being involved in the villages, they got a lot of different types of product, right? So they've got like their premier neighborhoods, they got designer neighborhoods, they got their villa units.
right.
You start seeing what different communities look like with different densities. So
Right,
how
right.
crowded the houses get and what those type of situations look like in that. I'm not a fan of turning Hernando County into a bunch of cookie cutter developments that have houses on top of houses.
Exactly. And I think that's what a lot of citizens are afraid of.
And that's what's happening right now because we don't, not that we don't, we need to have clear cut standards for what we're actually allowing, and doing this on a case by case basis. Although we do have to go ahead and, by law, kind of look at everything on a case by case basis, nothing really sets precedents one way or another. When developers start coming in and doing the same type of thing over and over again, even though it might not set precedents to do things one time, and it is a case by case basis, they're still expecting a certain product and a certain financial outcome
Right.
to their development, right? So, and that's what they tried to make an argument of at that point is, hey, we switched from 40-foot lots to 50-foot lots, but I can't really make this go ahead and work with our product unless we have these 5-foot setbacks.
Well, and there's a point that I would just say, I don't really care.
You know what? You need to figure out how to do it cheaper.
Yeah, and I don't know who the engineer was on that, but there was some certain engineers at the county commission meeting that you can tell that he's been doing it a long time. He's very knowledgeable, but he also uses that to kind of railroad his way through the whole process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't fault them, right?
Absolutely, they're doing their job.
He's going to bat for his client.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I think that's where he gets where you have to have a strong leadership team with the county commissioners and planning and zoning and say, look, we're just not doing this. We don't care if you can't do this. If you can't, there's a reason you can't do it. It shouldn't be there.
And this is the argument that I've had now for more than a year. Even though we are two separate boards, okay, and the planning and zoning commission is really just supposed to apply the standards to the project, and if it matches this, then it gets this. We still should have some type of meeting and understanding with the commissioners outside of us just paying attention to their meetings and seeing how they react. I mean, and listening to their workshops. That I think there should be some type of discussion as to what does Hernando County look like in 5 years.
Well, that's kind of, I was having a conversation with Josh earlier, and that's out of all the stuff that I look at and that I'm talking to people about and everything else. That's what seems to be lacking in this process so far. And I may be totally wrong. I'm just observing what I'm looking at right now. We've got some processes in place. You've got a comp plan in place, everything else. And you've got county commissioners, I think for the most part, are trying to make the right decisions. But it seems a largely slanted thing where it's a lot of it's reactionary instead of being proactive in it. And who's actually the visionary for the county? Who's saying, look, this is what we expect the county to look like going forward. And when we talked before, I was kind of thinking that's kind of what the comp plan was for. Is we sit down and decide a comp plan, and this is kind of the vision for the county.
It is, and so right now the comp plan is being redone.
Right.
So I think we talked about that last time, right? The current commissioners that we have didn't design the last comp plan. And that's the other hard part about these comp plans only coming in, I think it's every 10 years that they get redone.
Yeah, but I get that, and not to stop you short there, but even if because they're all elected at different times anyway, so it's one thing to say, they weren't involved in the comp plan, but as a commissioner, you would think, hey, that's one of the first things I'm looking at. As a new commissioner, I'm looking at the comp plan, making sure what I agree with, what I don't agree with, because that's going to influence, a lot of the decision making that you have going forward. So even if they didn't do it, they should be working toward whatever vision they currently have for that.
I agree.
And I don't know if it's difficult because, like you said, they're not allowed to talk to each other outside of the thing. And I don't know if there's a lot of communication between the commissioners on, hey, this is really what we're trying to do for the county, because just watching the commission meetings, there seems to be a little bit of difference of opinion and a little bit of animosity on certain topics between the commissioners. And so there doesn't even seem like there's a cohesive understanding of, hey, this is what we're doing.
You got an example on that?
Well, it's just when you see them disagree on certain things, it seemed to be kind of fundamental to what we're doing. And like, so there was one that I totally did not agree with. And like, I watch a couple of them, and for the most part, I agree with the decisions that they're making so far. I mean, I can see their thought process. I understand what they're doing, but there was one on County Line Road, for instance, right? So it was a application to change the zoning altogether. So this is already approved as I believe, correct me, I think it's a PDP or PHPGC. So it's a general commercial
PDP GC. Yep.
So, and I guess technically what it was approved for originally was office buildings, right? Under that classification. So there's a storage facility on a parcel. There's an ag strip next to that storage facility, and the very next parcel over is
another storage facility.
No, that's the subject property. That's the one that they're looking at, right? What the applicant was wanting to do was change that from the general commercial office building over to a commercial application where it would include C1 and then also be able to have, I think, 2 or 3 options for C2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it'd still be a PDPGC with C2 inclusions.
And I guess maybe that's where I'm confused, because originally what they were saying is, hey, this was originally classified as office complex, right? So is an office complex and a storage facility in the same?
Storage facilities in C2, office complexes in C1.
Right. So it's over. So then that general commercial is C1.
Yep. So C1 is a Euclidean type zoning. Okay.
Right,
so it's got a lot more inclusions than just.
No, and I gathered that from the meeting. I guess what I was getting at overall was it seemed to me, and not knowing how all that stuff worked, and I think looking at the commissioners, them not knowing how that whole thing worked as well, was it seems like across the board, for the most part, the commissioners are tired of all these storage units.
Yeah.
Right. And there's just, a ton of storage units. It doesn't bring a whole lot of value to the community, doesn't provide any jobs, whatnot. On the other side of that, the flip side is it's very low impact, low use, everything else.
Yep.
Brings in revenue, whatever. But on this specific property, so you've got a storage facility, you got ag, you got the subject property, you got a DRA, and then you got a residential neighborhood behind it, right? To the north of it, I think. For me as a citizen, I'm thinking, why would we do anything to change that from the office building? Because on a scale of community, you would think that, hey, we don't necessarily have a lot of extra office space in the county, I don't think. Anyway, we want to draw more businesses here so we can have better paying jobs and places for people to work, and you would think the best place for that would be right next to a residential community, so they're not commuting so far. So you've got residential community, you got office space for somebody to work in. For me, that sounds like an opportunity to increase the value of the proposition there. So what they ended up doing was electing to grant what the applicant was looking for, and changed it to where now it's able to have a storage facility on it, which nobody wanted, and also a drive-through restaurant. So for me, I'm like, why are we trading an office building where you could have some higher paying jobs and places for people to work for a storage facility that doesn't offer any opportunity for people to work, and a drive-through restaurant, which would be a lower paying position? So overall, for me, that whole thing went in the wrong direction.
I can understand where you're coming from on that, but at the same time...
And that had to all be approved. I mean, it wasn't like, hey, this guy's doing a bubble thing and this is what we're trying to do on this piece of property that's already approved for this. They were coming in and saying, look, we need to change the designation so we can get what we want. And it's not even for... the current owner isn't even going to develop it. She's going to flip it.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not even like you got a resident saying, hey, I really want to do this to my property. This is what I'd like to do, and I've been whatever. It's like she just wants to flip it because once you do change the designation, it's worth more money for her to flip it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the same thing's going to happen to the ag property in between it.
No, and you can see that because they granted this, and now you got an ag property in the middle of it that it makes sense to change that to commercial because it's between two commercial pieces of property. But I think overall, that's what the citizens. That's what.
A step back on that though. I mean, it's on county line. Shouldn't all that be commercial and industrial anyway?
Well, I would have to say no, probably. I mean, I understand it's a major thoroughfare, but the majority, there's a lot of property out there, I would assume, is agricultural.
There is, but it's all getting converted to subdivisions, and
it's only getting converted to subdivisions because we're allowing them to be converted to subdivisions.
Look at the comp plan. It's not in a rural designation.
But if it's listed as an agricultural piece of property, as a collective group, you guys have to make the decision and change that to a commercial designation.
To commercial, yeah, but unless it's already in the comp plan designated as commercial, you still have to get approval for it. But if it matches with what the comp plan was, then pretty much anything that comes before me asking for commercial is, yeah, that's what they want.
So if it's designated in a plan, so you've got somebody that's bought an entire street full of ag, and somewhere along the line, a county commission decided, look, we don't care, it's rated as ag, we want to make this whole street commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Then you guys can go in and redevelop all that as commercial?
It stays ag until somebody approaches us and asks for commercial, and then, yes, it matches the comp plan, and we're good to go.
So really the discussion then at that point is the citizens have to understand the comp plan, because that their only recourse is to go back before the commission and say, look, none of us agree with this damn comp plan you guys came up with.
Right. So the comp plan is developed by a third party, by a third party engineer company. They have to go through, I think, 2 or 3 workshops open to the public, and then it has to have like 2 meetings, actually official BOCC meetings, to review and then implement. So there's usually 5 instances at minimum that the citizens have to go ahead and get involved in the comp plan and actual modification process. And then I think of those, they have to do one in the morning and one after 5 p.m. on the workshops. And not only that, they don't have to do them in different areas of the county.
As a citizen, I think that's where a lot of the confusion and angst comes from the citizens, is they're constantly seeing all this agricultural land switched over to commercial use. And they're like, we've got a bunch of elected officials that are just going through and developing the county, when actually it's already been decided by a comp plan, and you guys are just sticking to what the comp plan was.
Mm-hmm. And look, I'm not going to say that there's times that it's outside of the comp plan too. I mean, that comes up every now and then. But I mean, probably 80% of what we do in planning and zoning, and 80% of the stuff that the commissioners are doing, is in accordance of the comp plan.
But okay, so that's really the crux of the situation, is understanding that comp plan.
Yes.
Because if everybody's tired of seeing all this overgrowth and development on commercial side and everything else, that's what they got to go against, is the comp plan, not you guys or anything else, because you're following the comp plan.
Well, and here's the other issue with that. That comp plan only comes up for review so often, right? So every time this comp plan comes into account and is getting voted on again, that's when everybody needs to go ahead and be involved. But the thing that you're going to realize as you start getting deeper and deeper into this is that all the people that are complaining, not all the people, a large majority of the people that are complaining moved here within the last 3 years.
And I don't have the numbers, and maybe that's something we can throw up when we do this, but just the population growth in the last 10 years by year.
Right.
You know, because it has enormously...
This is my favorite thing to do.
I think in the 90s, that 1990 or something, we might have been around 86,000.
Yeah, we have huge growth in this county. It's exponential. There's no doubt about that. And again, one of my favorite things to do in planning and zoning, when people are up there arguing against stuff, is, okay, we're all looking at the map, point to where you live.
Right.
You know, like,
how's this going to affect you? How close are you to the actual situation?
We want to know, okay, so, and we have people all the time that come out to go ahead and argue against stuff, and they live on the other side of the county. Not that you don't have the ability to have your input as to how your county is being developed, but when you're not even a party to the change, and it's not a direct impact on your life to have something next to you, a lot of the arguments about water runoff and traffic and stuff like that, they don't even come into play.
Yeah, and I can see your point on that to some extent. I mean, I would understand the water runoff and stuff like that, but at the same time, I would say if you're a citizen and you're going to develop a huge piece of ag property into, you know, whatever, multifamily, commercial, whatever it may be, even if I don't live next to that piece of property, I think that any citizen in the county can come and should be able to come and voice their opinion, and it does somewhat affect them, because otherwise you're relying on the one guy that's, right next to the piece of property. I don't care what you do. I don't, I'm going to be dead in 10 years or whatever, and he doesn't care, where it's going to affect the rest of the county. So, granted, the minute details as far as, how it's going to affect the exact neighbor next to him as far as water runoff and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, they don't have a dog in that fight, but the overall development
too is that for homeowners that come and argue for things that they're not expert in, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference on my actual opinion on how I do things on the commission. Okay, so, and what I mean by that, homeowners that come in and say, but the water runoff, or but the traffic, or but anything like that.
Yeah, they don't understand how that whole thing.
Well, in order to get this built anyway, it's got to go through multiple engineers to go ahead and even say that it works that way or it doesn't. The state of Florida doesn't allow you to even shed your water off your property onto your neighboring properties anyway. So especially on commercial stuff, any water that comes onto your property has to stay on your property. That's why we have retention ponds and drainage stuff in commercial. Every commercial project that comes in front of it, almost every single one of them has to do a traffic study and see what the actual impact to the traffic situation is and daily trips. So like that kind of stuff I don't even really pay attention to when people bring up. If you can go ahead and come in and say, hey, just so you know, I've lived here my entire life. I see where the water runs off on that right now. You guys are going to have an issue while you're doing this. Perfect. Let's go ahead and bring that up to the developer and say, you guys understand that you need to figure out how to keep your water on your property, right?
Well, and I think there's overall there's a process to this, right? So, as a developer or a landowner or whatever, there's a process to seeing if the project's even viable. So, and there's stages and there's costs associated with each one of those stages. So before they dump a ton of money into doing all the stuff that you're talking about on the civil engineering and everything else,
right,
they want to know if it's even a possibility, right? So I can see where they're going to bring it and say, hey, this is what we'd like to do with this piece of property. We understand all the details and stuff, but is it even viable to change it to what we want to do?
Would you allow us to do this if it works out?
Right. So once they get that approval saying, yeah, it's okay, then we can go through the whole, we'll spend more money on it to get into the...
Right. And what ends up happening at that point is that you just approved a vested interest in a property, and now anybody can come before you to ask for that same thing, whether they can make it work or not.
Well, they can come before you, but it's still got to work.
It's gotta
right.
work
So I think there's two separate things going on there. So number one, you're looking at the comp plan. You're assigning vested interest, saying, yeah, we agree that this piece of property should be rated at this or classified as this or however you guys do it. But beyond that, you're not saying that whatever project you're talking about doing is going to work on this piece of property, but we can zone it this because it makes sense with the comp plan and with the surrounding and everything else. So, I mean, I get that part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, back to the one we were talking about, I just don't understand why we wouldn't have just left that as a office building, instead of making that amendment to change it to what they needed to have to build another storage facility or something like that. That's not going to bring a whole lot of value to the.
Do you think storage facilities shouldn't go next to other storage facilities?
I think they should go where they're suited. And I can see the point where you'd want storage facilities next to residential. I just, when I'm looking at, and again, I guess it gets back to the overall vision of the community and the overall vision of the county of what we're trying to do.
Right.
If one of the comments that keeps coming up is, the jobs and, the pay of the jobs and what's available in the county and stuff like that. And for me, that's something that on the grand scale of things that we need to be looking at the county. What are we really attracting? Because
what I'll tell you though is having that property zoned for office professional not going to create any more jobs.
Why wouldn't it?
well, you can build the damn thing, but you still got to have the employers to go ahead and bring in the jobs.
But I mean, if there was a space, wouldn't you think there'd be more employment? I know myself, I'm looking for commercial property right now, and it's difficult to find something that's suitable and something that
I mean, what's suitable for? What is your actual criteria in that?
I would like something that's fairly newer and a nice complex that has got somewhat of secure access and.
Okay, so say that's built and it's $32 a square foot. You cool with that?
Probably not.
Yeah, no shit. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where it's at right now. So, yeah, they're going to go ahead and build it. It's going to be the same thing as everything. They're going to go ahead and have the rents posted way too high because they're paying today's construction prices. You still have things across the county that are $18 a square
No,
foot.
I get that too, but that gets over the broad spectrum of the question. Are we just selling land now for whatever it's used for now at the prices of today versus we only have so much land. You can only develop it so many times, right? So, yeah, maybe to your point, an office building being built today doesn't make sense because of the costs incurred, but maybe long term.
There's an entire strip mall on county land that's sitting vacant right now. you know?
And I get that, but I mean, I'm trying to get away from looking at today's circumstances, everything else, to looking long term to say, hey, eventually this is what we need. We know everything's cyclical.
Right.
At some point everything's sold out and everybody's got the right pricing and prices where everybody can afford what they need to afford, everything else. And we can't just go and build out the entire county to today's needs.
Right.
Because at that point then you can't undo that as easily as as one would think. I would think to make it, well, we really want more of this, or we really want more of this. And if it's already zoned that,
I think it's a little.
and it's not even that they're building a damn storage unit. She's going to flip the property, and all she was trying to do is make more money on the flip.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets back to, if you had somebody that was, hey, I want to do this, I'm going to invest in this, I'm going to, whatever. Maybe that would change my opinion on it, but not to just have somebody say, hey, I want this changed so I can flip it and make more money, and then we'll deal with it. Because that's when you come back to commissions 10 years from now and saying, look, we've got no control over this because they fucking changed it in 2024.
Right. I think my opinion on that's a little bit different because of the industry that I'm in professionally, right? So, in our drafting company, we do a lot of work in Pinellas, a lot of work in Hillsborough, areas that are already completely built up. Right. I do tenant changes every day for commercial to where it was zoned for one thing and we're switching it to something else for a completely different type of use.
No, and I get that, but I mean, have you ever changed an entire 3-story storage facility over to office building?
Sure have.
Really?
I'll show you the plans.
How do you get that even approved? I mean, that seems like a
How
nightmare.
do you get it approved? It's a simple build out.
Is it really?
So the way storage, that's the other thing. Like, this isn't the storage complexes of 1990. The way that they're doing all these now, they're pretty much designed to be office complexes anyway. All the fire access.
Are they really, though? I mean,
all the fire access is still there that you still need for storage. The storage facilities have to have sprinklers in them. Okay, so you don't have that issue anymore with any of the older buildings being turned over. All we do is we tear out the steel and we put up dividing walls. It's incredibly simple because all the floors between them are typically lightweight concrete anyway. So it's all individual floors.
So really, if we wanted to go back later or there was a need for it or whatever, we're flipping storage facilities to office buildings.
No big deal at all.
Gotcha.
I mean, I want to say, because we didn't build the last one, we did the plans for it, but I think it might have been a $200,000 reno.
Really?
Yeah, it's super cheap. All the structure's there. You got elevators.
I just thought there would be a different.
You got oversized elevators. You have all of the telecom stuff that you already need for it because it's got to be able to connect to the fire department and all that through the.
And again, that's just me not knowing what the hell I'm talking about. I just didn't know if if they were easily converted or if it was even possible to convert it because of different regulations that you need to make
When you
this for
start
the.
getting into the storage classification of the building code, the fire requirements are almost higher than actual office
Okay,
buildings anyway.
gotcha.
So the fire stuff's easy. What you do have a problem with sometimes in those is parking. And that's what I'll go ahead and say is kind of the harder part in that.
Okay.
Is if you're going to have an office complex instead of a storage unit facility, you got to have somewhere to go ahead and put new parking spaces. But guess what? Most of these have outdoor storage anyway, so they've got RV spots that we're converting over to just regular parking spaces.
Well, and honestly, couldn't you at that point, if it's a 3-story storage facility, just take the bottom floor and make that parking?
You could, you get into technicalities and stuff like that for actual parking structures.
Gotcha.
But yes.
Okay, well, so
it's all possible.
So that makes it a little bit more palatable, I think.
You know what's going to happen most of them? They're all going to turn into Amazon distribution centers and little Walmart substations and stuff like that for people ordering on their phone trying to get stuff delivered to their house. I guarantee you Amazon starts buying up old storage units at some point in time and making those little smart hubs for product.
Gotcha.
Drone, we're dealing with so we've got one of, I don't know if it's one of the first. It's got to be one of the first. We did a project with a developer in Pasco County. One of their 55 plus communities, we actually have a drone delivery spot and a agreement with Walmart where it's drone delivery from Walmart to this location, and they actually come and just fly drones over and drop your package in this little I want to say it's like 9x18 space.
That's amazing that they're doing that now, and how they keep that separated. And I mean, do you have to be there to receive your package, or they just pile up all the packages? They got to sort through the packages to get your stuff.
It's crazy. So I'll show you a video when we're all done with this. But it's a larger drone. Okay, it takes off from the parking lot of Walmart.
Right,
okay? Flies to where you're at, and then it's got a tether that goes ahead and brings your package down and actually drops your package pretty gently on the ground and pulls the tether back up. The drone never lands, never anything like that. It stays, 45 feet up in the air. But how long did it take to actually? I'm talking to Josh off camera here. How long did it take for that delivery to actually happen? Wasn't it like 3 minutes? Yeah. So from the time I think they ordered for our demo we went and did, they ordered like a 6-pack of water or something like that. And from the time they pushed the button until the time that it was actually delivered, it was like 3 or 4 minutes.
Really? Wow. That's amazing. But even with that, the new technology comes new problems, right? Yeah. So now you got a drone facility drop center in the middle of a residential neighborhood, and you got drones flying over, so you got noise abatement issues and stuff like that, I would assume. Yeah. So, but it's interesting to see how that whole thing comes together and how counties are built. And again, my concern is who's doing the overall vision for the county and what it wants to look like. And I guess we can switch buildings out and stuff like that, but there's some inherent issues with the parking and maybe some stuff like that.
And so here's the other thing with that. When you approve a storage unit, we're saying they're lower impact. It's not as big of a change to the roadways and stuff like that. Switch over to office complex, and your daily trips skyrocket, right? So,
no, and my whole thought on that was just, in general, trying to have a healthy county, and maybe this is wrong, but there's for me, there's two ways of looking at it, where you're either trying to bring higher paying jobs in that are going to advance the county and things like that, or you're looking at doing lower income housing to support the low wages that the county's providing, basically. And so I'm of the opinion I would rather try to increase wages than increase support for low housing.
I agree.
Yeah. So I mean, overall, when you're looking at that, it's like what's affecting and what's driving, and how are we going to make the county better so everybody's making more money, instead of we're trying to figure out how we can do the lowest cost housing possible because nobody's making any money.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I know that's always a toss up and which is first and everything else, but
You're
at the
talking about
same
having to go ahead and have something to incentivize businesses to come here, though.
right, and I'm sure we've got an economic development council that probably spends a shit ton of money on trying to entice companies to come here, don't
Too
we?
much, in my opinion. But yes.
Right, but I mean, at the same time, that gets to the broader scale. What do we have to offer to do this? Like, I mean, when you go around and you go to different places, there's all kinds of stuff going on. You know, you go to, like we talked about before. You know, I spend a lot of time out in Scottsdale, and it's beautiful out there. I mean, everything's pretty much new. It's been built up in the last 15 to 20 years, so it's all new and shiny and clean and everything else. But they've strategically laid out that city to where you've got a city center, you've got multi-use, you know, shopping centers with apartments above it and everything else, and there's restaurants and nightlife, and
That's a model I think would do phenomenally around here. Is like where you have like lower level retail, and then
we don't do any of that here, do we?
we don't have anything.
Okay,
like that.
I misunderstood you. I thought you said that was what we do phenomenally. That's why I gave you that look.
I think that would be a model that would work phenomenally here.
Right, and I think that's what works in most cities. I mean, you go anywhere in the country and anywhere in the world, and that's where the hum of the city or county is around that.
Right.
You know, and that's what attracts people. Yeah, I mean, you can go anywhere, and if you got your cafes and shops and restaurants and everything else, and then you got residential real close to it or right above it, even, that's what attracts people. And especially people that are working of working age, they want to be around that to have everything close by, and designing it that way cuts down on all the infrastructure needs and use and everything else, because you got a lot less driving. And instead, we're building everything we can linearly, and then we're putting service roads in to access it. And I just don't know if that's the best approach.
You're still at that point though talking fairly low wage jobs for those type of developments, right? Like,
well, no, and I get what you're saying, but this county was developed as a bedroom community basically for Tampa, right? So it was lower cost of
originally it was developed as a snowbird community for.
Well, yeah, with
States.
Deltona Corp built it, yeah. But I'm saying it kind of developed into, that bedroom community for Tampa, because the high paying jobs were in Tampa. People wanted something that was more affordable and a little bit less congested, and that's why they started coming up here. I think that model that we're talking about, that multi-use model, still lends itself to that. So even if they're going to Tampa, they would pick this area to reside in because it's less expensive than Tampa and everything else. And I think that's why you see like Wesley Chapel has really taken off, because they've got some developments like that. So yeah, it's a little more congested, a little more expensive there, but you've got all the amenities, you got multi-use complexes and things like that, and I think that's why they're having such a huge success in that whole.
Still no real high wage jobs there.
No, but you're pulling out of different areas there that do have high paying jobs, and I guess that gets back to if we want to get serious about creating high paying jobs, what does that look like?
Oh, and I think that solely comes down to the economic development department of our county coordinating with comp plan to go ahead and say, hey, this is going to be our higher tech development section.
Right.
Like the county needs to purchase land to go ahead and basically set that section of development for,
well, and that's what I'm saying, is that vision of the county, that if we want to go that direction, we've got a plan for it.
Yeah. As you get deeper into this journey, I think you're going to find out that we have a lot of that stuff, just not in Spring Hill proper. I think a lot of the.
Well, I think the majority of that type of stuff that we're talking about, as far as the push, is centered around the airport, correctly?
Portion of it, yeah. There's some stuff over by the interstate too that they're.
Yeah, 75 and 50, that intersection. I think that's where a lot of that is going to be.
Yeah.
Planned.
And that just makes sense for that area anyway, right? Like, so developments that can stem around transportation is what's going to really be kind of the driving force. When we go ahead and have proximity to the interstate, proximity to the sun coast, and those type of things where we can actually move product and people, I think you're going to start seeing a lot of higher end development at that stage as far as business goes.
I agree. And honestly, I mean, that's kind of how the whole thing was. I think that's how the whole thing was proposed about the whole expressway.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's put the expressway in because then we can build up around that. Well, what we've done is we built storage facilities around that.
Apartment complexes too.
Yeah. So, but we haven't had that centralized deal to where, hey, we're trying to invest in this, and
Right.
and again, this is a long journey, and I'm just digging into it. So there's a lot of stuff.
Have you looked at the comp plan at all?
I have not.
No?
I have not, and that's something.
That's where I would start.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I can look at it, but not necessarily I'm going to agree with it, or I'll understand why you guys are doing what you're doing, but
So come out, start talking about changing it.
well, and again, I don't want to talk about stuff like that until I actually know what the hell I'm talking about, and that's why we're going through this long journey. Is so first I can understand the process, and then I can figure out if there's a better way to do it.
So the company that's currently developing the next one, that's a large portion of what they do for municipalities everywhere.
But is that an algorithm that you're using saying, hey, this is your current layout, this is what makes sense to move all the pieces around so you stay consistent with zoning of different groups and stuff like that? Or are they looking at it as a overall thing? Look, this is where your county's at financially, this is what you got going on demographically, this will be the best use of your land to increase
demographics
longevity.
and population are the two things that weigh in the most on that. So they do a demographic and population projection and then figure out, okay, well, if we have this many more people in this area, what are the needs for those people at that point? And that's what kind of centers around, okay, well, we have these arterial roads. It makes more sense to have this type of stuff around this type of area.
But they're planning that based off, if they're planning it based off the demographics, they're extrapolating demographics on outward to say, hey, if this continues this way, this is what we're going to need. Not necessarily saying, how do we change the demographic makeup?
They're looking at historical data in the neighboring counties. So, look, everything that's happening in Hernando right now happened to Pasco 15 years ago, right?
Right. So you would think we'd have a
Like, oh, we saw what happened there. Let's plan for it over here. You know?
right. And I guess for me, I'm not seeing that side of it. I'm seeing a lot of reactionary movement and not a lot of proactive.
Well, I think a lot of what you're seeing, though, is more infill type stuff in the developed areas already. I don't think you're seeing for where the development's going. I think you're seeing, okay, well, yeah, these properties are being changed, but they're right on the outskirts of everything else that we have as it is, not to where everything's actually going to be.
Well, and I guess that's a different way to look at it, but at the same time, I think that you can't forget about what's already developed. You know, you've got a large section of the county on the west side of the county, 19 area, eastward, that's pretty much developed up there with a large population. And I guess the point I'm getting at is I understand what you're saying is the future of the county is 75 and 50.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're going to do all this great stuff is 75 and 50.
75 and 50 and yeah, north 50, 19 side.
Right.
So I think your two biggest areas are Royal Highlands and Ridge Manor. I think I know what you're saying is where the people are is where the pain points are right now. But what do you do at that point? Do we go ahead and say, okay?
Well, I think that's the problem though is you, and I'll get back to that. But I think what the issue that the county is having, and when we get all this feedback of the things overgrown and everything else, the more I dig into it, it's not necessarily about the growth. Mm-hmm. Growth is going to happen regardless because of all the stuff that we've already talked about. But when everybody sees the growth and they don't see the infrastructure that's already in place being taken care of, that's like we've got all this growth going on. And even if we build out 75 and 50 to whatever the futuristic comp plan is on that, you still got a large, vast part of the Hernando County residents that aren't going to be out there. They're here, right? So, and they're paying taxes, and they've been here for many years, most of them, and whatnot. And what are we doing to make sure that their quality of Hernando County is just as good as the future out here? And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, and where I struggle is when I look at Spring Hill Drive and I look at the shopping center that's right there at Spring Hill Drive, and I think Pinehurst or Cass Circle, right? Yep. That whole area there that is just kind of, it seems like it's lost in time, So
we can talk about that too. I mean, they created a CRA for that, and nobody ever wanted to fund it.
Well, no, and I don't want to dig too far into that just yet, but I'm just saying, for me, that's how you calm down some of the residents. That if I'm driving around and I'm driving on a nice road and I've got tree-lined streets and I've got shops that I can shop in that I'm not afraid to walk into, and things like that, the growth is less detrimental to me at that point, because I'm able to have what I'm looking for in my neighborhood. And it's like, when I'm looking at it, it's like, oh yeah, we got all this growth going on, but we're not maintaining the stuff that we've got. And that's a whole nother conversation, I think, to dive into, because I don't even know if we've got somebody that's just doing beautification projects in the county or maintaining, medians or.
So, what I'll tell you on the road maintenance side of things, those guys are on top of it. And I know everyone says against that.
Have you driven on Powell Road from fucking Barclay East?
Call it in. There's a web form that they have to go ahead and put in any problems that you see on that kind of stuff. And yeah, it might be deteriorating over time, but is drivable, right? So I had an issue. I don't know if you remember, it had to be a couple months ago. I was driving on one of the Pinehursts, okay, hit a pothole. Okay, pothole went ahead and debeated, or completely broke my rim.
Right.
And then I had a flat tire. I went ahead and called it in to the county engineers and said, hey, there's a pothole here. They had it fixed that day.
No, and I get that. And I think that's the part where we're differing a little bit on vision for the county and being proactive versus reactive. And you can see that whole thing from Barclay on Powell over the expressway on down to Chocochatty, which is California Street, I think. They've been on it because there's like 4 fucking million potholes that they've filled on that road, and that's all it is now, is one continuous pothole.
Yeah, it's all patches.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying. You can call them up and they can fix a pothole for you, but why aren't we doing something proactive to fix the whole road?
Because it costs money. Where do you want the money from?
Well, I guess that's where we get to, is where does do we have a maintenance like, I've talked to other business leaders, community leaders, and they map out their entire county, and they have every street in the county on a gradient scale of, this is the life of this road, this is the maintenance program for this road, and this is when we're going to have to tear the entire road up and redo it, because there comes a time to where, yeah, you can go out there and respray it and re-top coat it or whatever, but if you let it get too far, then you got to take the whole thing up and grind it off and build a new road, and that's substantially more expensive than just maintaining the road.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where it gets to, is, do we have a maintenance program for every road in the county, and who's in charge of that? And
I think a large portion of that is going to come down to funding. So the only funding source for road maintenance is gas tax.
So the only funding in an entire county.
You get
so if nobody, so when we get rid of all the gas cars and electric, we're screwed on the roads, as you're telling me.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a sound process?
You want to throw a 0.2 mil on for roads?
Well, you're going to have to do something. You can't just...
Fuck, they're not going to do it here. We can't get people
there comes a time to where... you have to come up with a solution that fixes the problem.
Yeah,
and it can't be
right now
the residents won't pass a 1 cent tax.
Solution right now that they're trying to push forward is the 1 cent sales tax. That I think 65 or 70% of it goes towards transportation because we don't have another funding source for it.
So every
just
county,
put it on a ballot referendum. Let the residents decide how they want to pay for it.
Every county in the state, that's the only way they fund roads. I mean,
I can't talk for every county.
No, I'm just saying, is that a state ordinance or something that says the only way you can pay for maintenance on your roads or is the gas tax? Or
I
is
don't
that how
think
we
that
choose
there
to do
is a state requirement for how you generate funding for anything.
So you can't take money out of a general fund and maintain a road.
You absolutely could take money out of your reserves and put it
not out
towards
of reserves. I mean, is it? And I guess this is just me not knowing what we're talking about, but you have a general account that's separate from the reserves, right?
Right, but your reserves and general fund are kind of the same thing. They're not. So your general fund would be like your operating account. Your reserves would be like your reserve account.
Right.
But it's not like a capital improvement account or.
No, I get. I mean, you would think there'd be a maintenance ledger line for maintenance for roads, maintenance for lawn, whatever. That's what I don't understand. It's who's doing the proactive maintenance of what we've got. So the shit that we've already paid all this money into doesn't deteriorate to where we spend a shit ton more money changing out and fixing it when we finally get a gas tax or whatever tax we want to pass.
That's stuff I don't know enough about that. I'd have to go ahead and actually look into it.
And that's probably a county administrator question, right?
It's probably a county engineer question, but.
Well, he would know he was doing. I don't know if he'd know the funding. Well, I guess he would know the funding.
He would absolutely know the funding process, and he would know the priorities of which roads are getting prioritized over other roads.
Gotcha. I just think in the grand scheme of things, that's what I'm looking at, and I'm sure that's what a lot of other citizens are looking at. Is we're talking about all this development, all this great stuff, but the shit that I drive on every day is horrible.
Yeah.
And there's no reason I should live in a shitty part of the neighborhood just because we decide not to maintain it when we're talking development over here.
I agree.
So I think as we dig into it, that's what I'm looking at is how do we fix that to where the entire county is because it's this section for now, and then we build another section here. We're gonna have the same fucking problem with that section there if we don't maintain it. And then we just move to another section, and we just keep developing and growing and everything else, and not doing anything to maintain.
Have you been to a county that you would say does roadways well?
What do you mean? To what extent?
Which Florida county does roadways well?
There's a few of them, man. I mean, it's hard to pull one off the top of my head, but...
Well, I would say, let's go ahead and pick the one that does it well, look at their funding source, and how they're actually maintaining it.
That would be the logical way to do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's I guess that's where I'm at is I'm trying to understand what we got and how it's working, and then the next logical step would be if we want to change it, we got to look at somebody else.
Only one I would go ahead and start bringing up is the villages, but guess what? Those are all privately maintained.
Yeah, the villages is kind of over the top, and that's a little bit different. But I mean, you can drive through a lot of different places, and they maintain their stuff. I mean. They do a really good job
all over the state, just as you do. I mean, I don't think Hernando's roadways are any worse than most of the other counties that I've been to.
Well, and again, I don't necessarily think that the roadways in general are horrendous, right? I think we've got certain roads that definitely should be taken care of because they're, and I don't know all the names of the roads, but collector roads and stuff like that are main thoroughfares that should be taken care of. But then it gets back to the other maintenance stuff that we're talking about and beautification processes and stuff like that.
Beautification is totally separate than maintenance, though, right?
Well, to begin with, I mean, you got to install it and then you got to maintain it.
Right.
So, I mean, however you want to look at that.
Show you a failed beautification and maintenance section. You can go to Marion County. Okay, they've got that whole section over by the mall that's now a vacant mall, But they did. It's like a 3-year push on beautification where they actually made like a competition for other businesses in the area to come in and do sections of roadway and flowers and all this shit. And that all looks like garbage now. Like it's all horrible because you start realizing how much it costs for the water for all that, and like they did a whole bunch of like annual flowers and stuff like that that weren't.
Well, I think that's what we're getting into, though. So, yeah, you've got the initial beautification cost, but then you also have to have a maintenance
Look at
program.
19 south of County Line.
Right,
Where they put in all those palm trees and all the rock and
right,
spent millions of dollars on the medians down
right.
19, and that's horrible now.
No, and I get that, and I think that's what we're talking about. Is somebody had a great idea, and I like that you want to do that, but you also have to have a long term plan for maintaining that.
Yeah, no, I
So,
agree.
I mean, I think there's a lot to that, but I mean, getting back to the planning and zoning side of it,
Uh,
and just the overall changing. And I think this is why I'm really excited to talk to some of the commissioners to get their viewpoints on what their view and what their expectations are and what their vision is for what they're trying to make the county. Because really, in essence, that's what you got. You got a group of board of county commissioners that's what they should be doing. Is this is the county that we want. This is what we're trying to change. This is what we're trying to grow. And I'm sure there's a lot of them having those ideas and stuff as far as that. But I don't I don't know how effective it is, or if it's just, hey, we're dealing with whatever comes up and we're being reactive to it. And I don't know how they would get those agendas changed. When like, I was shocked when I was looking at the Board of County Commissioner meeting, and we're talking about code enforcement guys, right?
mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure about this, but I think we got one code enforcement guy. Could that be right?
No, we got I think 3 or 4.
Okay. It sounded like we had a very limited group of code enforcement guys,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the county commissioners didn't understand that we've only got so many code magistrates. I guess there's somebody that looks at the code complaints and decides a ruling of this is
Mm-hmm.
what we need to do, and that section is backed up by like 3 months, I think they said. So
So the code enforcement aspect is a longer process than a lot of people realize too. Um, and I don't know specifics about staff or how they actually adjudicate on all that kind of stuff, but I do know that like the process to go ahead and say you call in, trash on somebody's lot, right? Like mattresses and all kinds of shit dumped in vacant lots. They've got like a timeline that's almost like 3 months of just trying to contact the owner to go ahead and get the stuff removed
and that
before
gets
they
back to the
can.
process. They have to have so many days of notice and stuff
Yeah,
like
they
that.
got X amount of notice, and then because the way that it eventually gets fixed is code enforcement goes out, sends a company out to go clean it up, and then they have to go ahead and bill it back to the owner, right? And it normally goes ahead and gets billed back to the owner on their property tax. If they have to actually do something, it's going to be a tax based thing. So they got a whole process for that. But even still, who'd be really good to talk to about this would be Chris Linsbeck. He used to be on code enforcement. He does a lot of the community development stuff now. But they have a whole process of how many times they got to go out and talk to the owners and kind of, here's your warning. Next time we're going to be out, you get this, and next time you get out this. Uh, but to get one thing resolved is like a 6-month process in general.
Right.
It's a much longer ordeal than just, hey, I'm calling in today. I want you out here on a Tuesday to go ahead and get my neighbor to move his boat out of his yard.
I mean, does it get to the point with that long of a process and everything that people just like, fuck it, I'm not going to deal with it. I don't need to be wrapped up in this for 6 months trying to get this done.
I got mixed opinions on code enforcement in general.
I mean, me in a perfect world,
Mm-hmm.
the residents aren't having to call anybody. We just got somebody driving around, making sure the county's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and if not, citing them, or notifying them that, hey, you need to get this fixed. Because where it came up in the meeting was, evidently we've got some type of ordinance where if you're building a new home, per se, and you want to have an RV on your lot while you're doing that,
It's a special exemption permit.
yeah, you could do that for a year, I guess, right?
You do it up to 2 years. We typically issue it in 6-month increments.
So they weren't clear on that because this came up in the county commission meeting, right? So
it's because we handle it in the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then it normally doesn't have to go to the county commissioners.
right, but so what's happening? Why it came up in the county commissioners because of the code enforcement side of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're kicking around. They're like, look, who's checking up on this? Who's following up, saying, not only did they do the permits to build a new home, but they're actually building the home, to have this thing on the lot for whatever time that you guys allow them to have it. And there wasn't anybody really doing that. And they're like, well, they have to, I think Steve Champion was saying, well, they have to apply for impact fees and everything else to build the thing. And who's going to apply for an impact fee to build a house and not really build a house? Well, it's whatever it was. It's like $4,500, maybe go up to $9,100 or whatever. You have to have the impact fees paid to hook up the water and the sewer anyway. So I disagree with them on that notion that somebody would do it and not actually build a house or not have the intent to build a house. But because it's only whatever between $5,000 and $10,000 to do an impact fee, and then you have a mobile home, which is a lot less than a regular house, or not a mobile home, but a RV that you put on there. But long story short, on that whole thing, it came up that the chair says, well, there's a lot on Augustine that's got like 7 RVs on it that's been there forever, and why is it allowed to happen? And again, it gets back to and if you drive through Spring Hill, you see RVs parked next to houses. There's already houses there, and I think there was talk that originally it was, hey, we allow them to do that, so if they're going to come down and visit people, or they've got guests coming, they're visiting people, they can temporarily put one there. But then that temporary tends a long, drawn out process, and it's there forever, and nobody's really following up on it, nobody's checking on it, and that gets back to, the look of the neighborhood and everything else.
Yeah.
And Steve's a champion, seems like a big proponent of citizens' rights, and you should be able to do whatever you want to do on your piece of property. And I get that to a certain extent, but at the same time, it shouldn't affect everybody else in the neighborhood. So, if you buy a house and you have a certain neighborhood, and then somebody else comes in and starts deteriorating that neighborhood, you should have the ability to say, hey, this just isn't right. And there should be some constraints on what you're allowed to do. And that's based on whatever laws are set in place and everything else. So I think it gets back to us enforcing those laws and having somebody do that. And it came into the whole thing. And I was just astonished that even the commissioners see the issues, they know of specific issues, and it's still not being addressed. And I think the county attorney even says, well, if nothing else, we can sue them. And I'm not in favor of suing residents over something that should be handled a different way, but I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of room for improvement in a lot of these processes. And
well, it's personal opinion, I don't think we should have proactive code enforcement at all. I think code enforcement should only be a reactive department. I think it should have to be developed and triggered by some community complaint. And I don't think that we should have just people going around policing our ordinances at all. Personal opinion.
Yeah, and I guess I see part of that because, I mean, you want people to be able to do whatever they want to do with their property, but at the same time, you've got regulations to maintain some type of semblance of what's expected out there.
I think we should also get back to a point where we can go ahead and talk to our neighbors. I think that on its
but
face
you
is a problem.
You know as well as I do, there's some shitty people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you and I live next to each other, or Josh and I live next to each other. We can say, look, are you having an issue getting rid of this shit? Because if you do, I can help you out, and move it. But there's some other people who are just like, I don't care. I'm gonna pile up with 16 broken cars and everything else, and
Cool. That's when code enforcement can step in, right?
yeah. But at the same time, you might as well bring the sheriff out there too, because now you've got a neighbor against a neighbor fighting it out, that living in close proximity, and that's how you have those conflicts escalate quickly.
I suppose.
And I'm not a fan of this gets a whole nother issue, because the state's so involved with the county that it's just ridiculous. But the state passes something saying that you cannot call code enforcement and do an anonymous complaint. Now you have to give your name, so it's public record and everything else, so your neighbor knows who exactly called. And I'm not a favor of that at all, because of the same situation is you're calling up, and then your neighbor's going to come over and bang on your door, and he does it at my house, he's getting shot in the face. So that's a whole nother issue. I mean, if you're having an issue already and you got somebody that already doesn't align with your values, it's only going to get worse by having that confrontation, in my viewpoint. And I would just think that the county is the kind of the policing agent of, hey, these are our ordinances that we came up collectively as a group, we're going to maintain them.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I think I got a little bit of a different opinion on that.
No, and I get it. I don't know. The whole statute and the basis for them changing it was they were trying to cut down on all the erroneous phone calls to code enforcement and people just badgering their neighbor over things that shouldn't be called in, and I get that aspect too. So I mean, you got shitty people on both sides of it sometimes.
I think fundamentally though, you got a right to face your accuser.
Well, it's not the accuser. It's not like I'm saying, he's a pedophile or something like that. You can go up and look, and he's got 6 cars on blocks in his front lawn. I'm not the accuser. I shouldn't have to be the accuser.
I think it's different on kind of a suburban type layout too versus agricultural property. And
well, that's a whole nother issue, because I found out last night agriculture basically has no rules.
Yeah.
They can do whatever the fuck they want to do and clear as much trees off the property they want to do. They can build any building they want to do.
Okay, maybe not exactly.
Well, maybe
not.
maybe not to that extent.
Maybe bring that in a little bit, but yeah.
But the ag rules and regulations are broad.
Yes.
Because that came up with some citizens that were frustrated that you've got somebody that's pretty much clear-cutting property out there, getting rid of all the trees and everything else, and it's listed as ag, and is even pulling a permit for this because the whole tree issue came up on even developments and majestic trees, and we're cutting trees down to do stuff. And
I'm so fucking tired of all that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of shit going on to unpack there, but it got into where, look, ag doesn't have the regulations. They can, if they want to clear out the trees to put cattle on the ground, they're more than welcome to do that. So, and I think that's a lot of things that citizens don't understand as well. I mean, you can list it as ag, but it's not going to mean it's going to be a nice little forest next to your house. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that. So, there's a reason I'm not in politics, because I don't have a lot of patience for a lot of stuff, but I don't envy the position you're in sometimes when you're having to have these discussions, and
it's just a lot of time, man. I mean, you start really realizing everyone's got an opinion. Everyone should be able to go ahead and voice their opinion.
Right.
You should be able to hear all sides of every story.
Right.
It's difficult for us because we're not that we're handcuffed, but I mean you're kind of tied in on what you can and can't do on my board.
Right.
Commissioners can do whatever the hell they want.
Right. And it seems like they do.
Quite often. Yeah. But it's
and I stopped you on a couple of things, so I apologize. But any of that stuff you remember, just
I don't know. It's as we get deeper and deeper into this, I'm sure everything's gonna come back and resurface. I mean, honestly, there's only 4 issues that people talk about in the county. We're going to be hitting the same damn things. It's going to be development, maintenance and roadways, taxes, and.
Well, it was surprising because I dug into the taxes a little bit, and there's actually a tax. I forgot what it's called now, but I printed it off, and it goes over pretty much all the tax information for every county in the state, and it's broken down by the county, and it tells you how you compare to all the other counties in the state and everything else, and the tax base for this county is not overly high compared to the rest of the counties. And I heard something with the sheriff the other day that kind of surprised me that I may be wrong on this, but it's on video with the county commissioners. But
the guys put a fact check down here.
Yeah. he said something that out of the 67 counties, his funding per capita is ranked 57th.
That's probably about accurate.
Yeah. So I mean, everybody complains about his budget and everything else, but when you look at the grand scheme of things, per capita, he's ranked toward the very bottom, and like we said, there's some poorer counties in the thing that would definitely offset that a lot, but he's at the bottom of that whole list per capita, so maybe he's not overfunded, which is a lot of people's opinion, is we're just dumping too much money into the sheriff, but maybe it's a ratio that maybe we're not collecting enough taxes to offset some of the other stuff, because our tax base is toward the low end of the state as well. But at the same time, he walks in and asks for another $800,000 for an emergency project that they got to do.
It's because the commissioners asked him to cut 35% of his budget.
Right. So, and then again, I was just shocked at that, because he walks in and he asks for $800,000, and I think he justified maybe $275,000 of what he asked for.
What I'll say about our sheriff's office is our sheriff is a pretty good politician.
Well, he was our sheriff, and then he took another position, right? Wasn't he in the state senate or something? Am I wrong on that? Because wasn't
before him.
What's that?
I said before him, yes. Al wasn't.
No, he's never done anything other than the sheriff. Okay,
he did. So he was the president of the. I forgot the name of the actual organization, but it's like the Sheriff's Association.
Okay.
I think he was actually like the 100th president too,
Gotcha.
just last year.
For some reason, I had in my head, I thought he went and he took a position with the state or something like that.
That was the guy before him.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything negative to say on that side of it. I just, the more you dig into it, the more questions you got, man.
Yeah, always. So you gotta be careful. I think by the end of this, people are gonna start thinking you're pro-tax.
What's that?
I think by the end of all this, people are going to start thinking you're pro-taxing.
I'm not necessarily pro-taxing, but I'm not necessarily 100% against taxing. I mean, taxing has a basic function, just like any home budget does. You have to pay for things you want.
You do, and the only issue with the way that we've got taxes set up right now is the people that control where the tax money goes, right? Like, if it could honestly be, hey, we've got this expense, we need to go ahead and fix this. Can we figure out how everybody can pay for this real quick?
That's what I've always said. I'm like, when we first started talking, we were talking about how they tried passing the 0.5% sales tax before or whatever, and I'm like, I'm not giving these fucking guys another dime. I mean, I don't even know where the money's going now. I think we're paying them too much now.
Right.
So, but I've always said that, if I can get everything I want, double my taxes. It's a value trade there. You gotta understand what you're getting for the value.
It's like, hey, we need $3 million to repave Powell. Who wants to chip in?
It's almost like that's how smaller communities work, right? When we were talking that you've got some small counties that
little tiny towns and stuff like that, where
right, and it's almost like we got away from that because we got big, and we should have the tax base now to do the things we want and be a little independent and everything else. But it's like now we're getting back to, well, we just need to figure out how to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I think that gets back to where everybody says there's a lack of transparency. So we need a tax, but we're not really going to tell you what we're going to do with it. we want a 1 cent sales tax added onto this. We're only going to be able to use whatever amount for roads. But what roads are we going to do? Are we going to build a whole new interchange somewhere, or are we going to maintain the road that's falling apart?
And this is the problem. I think what we really have here, and I know I've said it's an education problem, but maybe it's an advertising problem.
Oh, it definitely is.
So all this information is out there for everybody to get. Like, there's a list right now of all the roads in order of necessity.
I looked at that list.
Yeah.
And I saw where they're paving, and I have not had a chance to really dig into the research. I did some little Google, top views of it. I'm like, why the fuck are we repaving a road way out here in the middle of nowhere? When we got main thoroughfares that aren't being maintained.
No, it's probably about cost and availability of funds and
right. And then we got into it a little bit
it.
too, to where you said that like in certain communities they can band together and say, hey, we'll go in on this.
Yeah, through a MSBU.
Yeah. So I think maybe there's some of that, but I agree. There's definitely an education part of it. There's an advertising part of it, so everybody knows what's going on. Mm-hmm. And that's really where you get to the, hey, there's no transparency. Well, it's there, but it's not there. I mean, and honestly, you look at our government website versus some of the other government websites.
I'll stop you right there. Our government website's getting completely overhauled. We're redoing the entire thing.
Well, I'm just saying, awesome.
Yes.
Because right now it's very cumbersome.
It's and
to find what you're looking for specifically.
Here's the other part that's cumbersome about that. There was a small group of people that went around and sued just about every government office because of website accessibility bullshit. And they claimed it was an ADA thing.
Right.
And I think that's what makes our website as cumbersome as it is to find things. Like, it has to be posted in a certain way, and it's got to be in certain formats for people to be able to use, readers and stuff like that.
But you would think that if our website as a county had to be like that, the city website would have to be like that as well. And if you go on Brooksville city website, like, you got like, I don't know, 8 buttons you can click on, and you can find whatever you need.
Has anybody sued the city yet?
Well, I don't know.
Who knows, know?
I just... But it gets back to...
If they haven't, you could probably go ahead and claim something, sue them, get some money out of it.
I'm trying to figure out how to get more money into the system and not less,
Yeah. Well, if we could get people to stop suing us for dumb shit, that'd probably be...
And it was kind of funny. You mentioned the last time we talked about if we could just get people to stop running over stop signs.
Uh-huh.
I've seen 4 stop signs ran over since we had that conversation.
Dude.
What are these people doing?
It's stupid, right?
Yeah.
So talk to Scott about that. I want to say it's some astronomical number, like 600 stop signs a year run over.
That's crazy.
It's, or maybe it's like in the 200s, but yeah, it's some insane number of stop signs that get run over every year.
I don't know. There's a lot to it, man. So, as always, I appreciate you sitting down with me, and this is definitely going to be a journey that you're going to be right there with me as long as you want to be. So,
we'll start trying to get some other people in here and start getting some.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about the couple,
if not answers, at least direction.
A couple guys we got lined up already. Again, we want to go right through the county commissioners, but as we dig into this, we might deviate a little bit from a commissioner and go to a different route because of some of the stuff that's coming up. So,
perfect.
But yeah, awesome, man. Another good conversation, and look forward to keeping going down the journey.
Yeah. Next time on Hernando This Week.
Yep.